Alrighty. This is Sports for Real with Coach Hall. This is going to be a short one. The college football playoffs kick off tonight, where you have Notre Dame taking on Penn State. Notre Dame, I believe, I can't remember what seed they were, but I know Penn State was 6, and they knocked off SMU, and I think Notre Dame was 7, and they got by Indiana. And tonight they're going to play in the semifinals after both winning last week, and they're going to play down in Miami. First time in a while since Penn State and Notre Dame play, but the kind of football that you're going to see is going to be very similar to what you saw the last time these two teams played. We still kind of play an old-fashioned style of football where you got to run the football, make timely conversions, keep the clock moving, shorten the game, that kind of thing. That's what you're going to see today. Now, Penn State, they playing the best football that they played all year, and they've get some bounces every now and then. Notre Dame is a little bit more gritty than what Penn State has, and the thing is, they got by Georgia. But Georgia, they weren't 100%. That's not an excuse, because I don't think that Georgia would have been able to get by Notre Dame anyway. They've been living pretty much all season beyond 9 lives, and they finally caught up to them. And not to say that wasn't a good football team, it just wasn't to be for them this year. Like I said before, when you have a backup quarterback, he comes in when your star gets hurt, he has a different energy that he's bringing to the team that's kind of like a shot in the arm. But when you have time to sit down and look at that backup quarterback for a whole week, because he's going to be starting now, it makes a big difference. And that's what happened with Georgia. So that's how Notre Dame was able to get through. Penn State, on the other hand, they playing some pretty good football, like I said, but neither one of those teams are struggling like what Texas is. And if you want to call winning 2 games is struggling, but for a team that's highly rated like they were, they should not have had difficulty getting by Arizona State and Clemson the way that they have. But that's tomorrow's game. But the thing I want to talk about today briefly was, should independents like Notre Dame have different criteria for making the college football playoffs, because they don't have to deal with a conference championship? James Franklin of Penn State brought that point up. He was basically saying that there should be some balance to how things are done with the college football playoff, and he's saying that everybody should be in a conference. And by Notre Dame, how you doing, Zach? And by Notre Dame not being in a conference, they can pretty much play where they want to play. Now, in their defense, they do play USC every year, and that can be a positive or a negative depending on how USC decides to play in a particular year. They are obligated to play 5 games against ACC teams, which depends on who you ask, could be a great advantage. But Notre Dame hasn't exactly been tearing the world, setting the world on fire. But this year they've been playing solid football well enough to get to a high mark and get into the playoffs. But regardless of how they got there, you cannot dispute what they've done since they've been in there. But Franklin's pretty much saying, Ethan Pierce says, "Hi, how you doing?" He's basically saying that all teams should be in a conference. But Notre Dame, not only do they have the autonomy to create the schedule that they want, like I said, they got 5 ACC games and USC is 1, and they have an agreement with Stanford, so that's 7. They got 5 games pretty much to play wherever they want to play, and Franklin thinks that is a huge advantage. And in reality, it is a huge advantage, but not necessarily on the playing field. Where Notre Dame is really getting over is the financial aspects of it. They have that contract with NBC, and even though they're not in the conference, they're making the same kind of money that the teams like in the SEC are making because of the contract with NBC. So Notre Dame has no desire to go to a conference. And I think if you put it to them and say, well, you got to go to a conference, or be independent or be not allowed to go to the playoffs, I think they would say, well, we just won't go to the playoffs. And that's just the way it appears, because finance is above everything else. And if they can keep all the money and do what they want to do, then of course they're going to do that. But Franklin did, by bringing that up with Freeman sitting right next to him. So it wasn't like he was, saying something that he was trying to hide. He just told everybody straight up that Penn State doesn't have the same advantage that Notre Dame has. But that has nothing to do with tonight's game. That is something for the College Football Playoff Committee to consider in the future. Oh, Ethan Pierce said, what's up, man? I'm doing all right, man. But like I said, I don't think it's going to change. But as long as Notre Dame has a decent team, they pretty much got a clear path to the playoffs. And if you schedule certain teams, you can pretty much guarantee yourself a trip to the playoffs. That kind of goes back to what Alabama AD, I think his name is Byrne, was trying to make. He said, why should we play a tough outside conference schedule if it's not going to benefit us? Well, he's got a point. If Notre Dame doesn't have to do it, why should we have to do it? But the same thing that you've been championing, the same thing you hide behind, and the same thing that you use as your power, being in the SEC, it's the same thing that works against you. You're playing against stadiums full of 100,000 people, and the games are competitive, and you consider yourself the best. So I think you have to live with the positives and negatives of that. And Byrne, he seems to want all the advantages. But regardless of what he said, if you look at the history of Alabama, that is not a program that has been ducking people. Florida, on the other hand, could be considered a team that has ducked a lot of people. Because if you look at the way they schedule, they don't step outside the conference and take very many chances. They play non-conference games just like everybody else in the SEC. But who are they playing? They're playing against teams that they paid to come play, $1 million, whatever it is, to come take this whipping. They get the team gets some work in, get a victory, everybody's happy. But when you look at chances that they take, Florida's not taking very many chances, man. You just look at the new member, Texas. Florida's played Texas before, but the last time they played Texas before this year was exactly 1 year before the date of Pearl Harbor. That's the last time Florida played Texas. The Longhorns came to Gainesville, they whipped the Gators, and the Gators wouldn't sign them no more up to this year. They do the same thing. They took a chance. They played Michigan, what's about 8-9 years now. They played them in Arlington. Michigan whipped them. They didn't take another chance after that. But LSU, Alabama, Auburn, those are teams in the SEC that will play you. But Florida, no. Georgia is better than Florida, but not much better. They all hide behind the SEC. So those teams are going to continue on doing what they're doing, but schools like Alabama, regardless of what the AD says about the scheduling advantages, they're not going to start playing the weak sisters of the poor when they've been doing it all along. When they've been playing good teams all along, they're not going to change the way that they've been doing things over the years. That will weaken their brand. So I think he's just being frustrated because some teams like Notre Dame clearly have an advantage, and he wants to have some of that advantage steer his way. Now, like I said, Franklin had a good point about Notre Dame's advantages for the playoffs, but regardless, once you get to the playoffs, you got to play. Now, Indiana, I still think they had a problem with the names on the shirt. That was a pretty good football team, but up here, when they see teams like Ohio State or Michigan or Notre Dame, then they start thinking like teams of Indiana before. Well, we can't beat these guys. We can't compete. So they just mentally don't show up. And when they get the result that they were looking for, then all of a sudden they start to play a little bit of football. Saw that in all three of those teams' names that I just called, those games that they played against them. That's just how those games went. Indiana just couldn't get over the name thing. But now you don't have any more pretenders in the playoffs. And starting tonight, what you're going to see is who controls the line of scrimmage wins the game. And I think that Penn State, Boise State was a good matchup. And last week's game, I think they did play a little bit tougher competition than Notre Dame. Not saying that Georgia was not good competition. I'm saying that Georgia wasn't at full speed. So even if they were at full speed, they could have given them a better game. Not saying that Georgia would have beat them, but it just been a little bit more difficult for Notre Dame. Still came down to special teams and other mistakes that beat Georgia. So I think that Notre Dame, they're taking statements like what Franklin said about them not being able, having an easier route to the playoffs, and they're using that as a chip on their shoulder. And I think if it comes down to it, they might just be a little bit more tougher than Penn State. And I'm going to take Notre Dame. I'm definitely taking the points. I believe Notre Dame might be favored by 2 points. I'm not sure. But I think I'm going to go with Notre Dame tonight. I just think in the end they're going to be just a little bit tougher than, they're going to be a little bit tougher than Penn State. But the question is, can Drew Aller stand in there and make some throws? He's been playing pretty well the first 2 rounds. And if he can complete some passes and convert and keep those sticks moving, I think Penn State's got a real good chance. But if any one of these teams come out and start turning the ball over, then they're not going to win. But I think if it comes down to it, the fourth quarter, I think the toughness of Notre Dame is just a little bit more than what Penn State has. And I think in that situation, then Notre Dame is going to win this game. Now the other game, we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. It has the potential to be a shootout, but I think if you're going to beat Ohio State, and everybody and their mama is picking Ohio State now because of what they've done the last 2 games, I think if you're going to beat them, the first thing you have to do is go back and look at that Michigan tape. Michigan, they have a quarterback, they had a decent running game, and they had a pretty good defense. That still shouldn't have been enough to beat Ohio State and a couple other teams they beat, but they had enough heart left over from last year's championship team to put themselves in position to win that game. And I think if you go back and look at that tape and see how they handled Smith, because Smith, he seems to think nobody can guard him, and what Chip Kelly is doing, he's moving him around trying to get different matchups down the field. Like I said, if you look at the Michigan tape, you will find that there are things that Michigan did to that team that slowed them down. And if you can copy that, that would be into your advantage. Now, keep in mind about Texas and Penn State. If Texas is 0-12, they got one thing, and they always will have one thing, and that's speed. Oregon has speed, but Oregon's problem was rust. If they weren't rusty, then you would have had a better game. Texas will always be able to run, and because they'll be able to run, they will have somebody that can match up with Smith to shuttle him around or play some kind of gimmick defense to slow that guy down. So keep that in mind as you watch that game tomorrow night. I'm not going to make a prediction now because it's Notre Dame and Penn State time. So I'm just putting that out there for you to watch. Texas has the speed, and regardless of how the offense have been beaten around the bush lately, this is a very dangerous team to Ohio State. So just because you blew out 2 teams, that means nothing. Look at that Michigan tape and you get a great idea of how to stop Ohio State. All right, Andrew Hall says Notre Dame does have stipulations for making the playoffs. They cannot get a first round bye. No, they can't get a first round bye because they can't be a conference champion. That's the way the bylaws are written. That is not specifically written for Notre Dame. But if that was and people are complaining about that because you have conference champions getting these high seeds that some people don't agree with. So they're going to complain until some of those changes are made. And when that change is made, then that opens Notre Dame up to get a higher seed. So they can be 13-0, play the lowest 5 teams in the ACC, and still be one of the top teams in the playoffs. So there's no real stipulations on Notre Dame. It just happened that they're not in the conference, and that's the only reason they can't get a first round bye. All right. Yes, but Michigan and Ohio State is a rivalry. Different situation. Man, look here, man. The rivalry only means something at the beginning of the game. But once the game starts, you got to settle down and play some football. And Michigan, they don't see Ohio State, and by that, they don't care about playing Ohio State, say like Indiana would, because they know they compete talent-wise with Ohio State. But Ohio State should have blown out Michigan according to the paper. But Michigan came up with a game plan to slow that team down. So yes, it's a rivalry, and that plays some part in it. But by that midway in the first quarter, all that emotion that you have, jumping up and down, oh, we're playing against our rival, that goes out the window. You got to settle down and play some football. And Michigan put something on Ohio State, regardless if it was a rivalry or not. Okay. That's a good point, but, you know, Michigan, the fact that they were able to slow down Ohio State was monumental, especially without them being able to move the football the way that you think a winning team should be able to move the ball. All right. But still, though, it's great to talk about, and it should be a good game tonight. And I'm expecting a close game. And if it plays out that way and no major mistakes, I see Notre Dame somehow pulling this out. But Penn State, they got that quarterback, Aller, he's playing pretty well. And he's got me thinking that it's going to be hard to get by Penn State. But doesn't mean a thing. They still got to play tonight. And that stopping that running back from Boise State was huge. So it should be a good game for Aller, because Notre Dame, as well as they've been playing, Georgia had opportunities that backup quarterback, Stockton, he just didn't come through when he absolutely had to. And when you add to the fact that the Georgia has been dropping passes pretty much all year long, that didn't help them out a lot. So it's going to come down to turnovers and the line of scrimmage. Whoever wins the line of scrimmage and the turnover battle is going to win this game. So I'm looking forward to it. But in the meantime, I got some other stuff to say about NIL. I don't have time to get into it now. But sometime this afternoon, I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about, is Neil killing college football? So I appreciate you guys chiming in. Appreciate the comments. Andrew Hall, Arizona shooter, Ethan Pierce, everybody else that chimed in for a few minutes. I appreciate you stopping in. Hit that like button, man. I appreciate it. And I'll see you guys this afternoon. In the meantime, I got to go to work. So I'm out.